G'day and welcome to another video with Better Pics. Hope this finds you all well and healthy. Got a video today where I'm going to show you the complete edit workflow and export for a panorama that I photographed in South Georgia, which for those of you who don't know where South Georgia is, it's a little group of islands off which is at the east coast of South America, and it's in the Southern Ocean and a very popular destination if you are on your way to Antarctica. So it's an incredible location, amazing landscapes, and definitely worth a visit if you are lucky enough to have the opportunity to go to Antarctica or do any sailing in that area. Now this particular image was photographed in St Andrews Bay in South Georgia. It's a very well-known bay and the home to a large colony of penguins, somewhere in the vicinity of 400,000 to 500,000 penguins. And St Andrews Bay has been the subject of many well-known documentaries by National Geographic, BBC, David Attenborough. It's certainly a place that has been highlighted in the documentary space many times and is simply amazing. So this panorama is made up of 15 images, and you can see that they have been shot vertically. They were photographed on Canon full-frame SLR. It was a number of years ago that I photographed them, so I think it was a 5D Mark III from memory. And the process that I used to shoot them was all manual, which is normally the process that I shoot. So manual ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. And with panoramas, I also shoot manual focus. So I'll pre-focus on, in this case, the landscape, which I would have pre-focused a third of the way into the scene. And it was photographed at 40 millimeters, which you can see on the right-hand side there. ISO 500, f8, 1/60th of a second. Now the reason I used those settings was f8 for this particular lens is the sharpest aperture for that lens, and I know that because I've done testing in the past. In order to get a decent shutter speed, I had to use ISO 500. You can see it was a bit of an overcast day. The lighting was even, but not great in terms of it wasn't a bright day. And 1/60th, I just wanted to make sure that I was getting a completely sharp image. So I could probably get a sharper image with a slower shutter speed, but it was, for my technique of shooting, certainly a guaranteed sharpness from a motion blur perspective. Now, I shot this handheld, which I shoot the majority of my panoramas handheld, unless I'm using a really long exposure. And the reason that I do that is because it's quick and easy. So it's very quick for me to shoot those images. I literally had 10 or 15 minutes at this location, and I was filming at the same time. So I had a video camera sitting on a tripod, and I wanted to make best use of the time that I was there. So while the video camera was being used on my tripod, I shot this panorama handheld. Now you absolutely can shoot panoramas handheld. You can run into a few more stitching issues, or you have a higher probability of running into stitching issues without using a panorama head. But I've done a lot of stitching of panoramas that I've shot handheld, and my technique for shooting has certainly become pretty solid. And generally speaking, I don't have too many issues. So this image stitched together perfectly. It was part of my exhibition in my book that I released after this trip, and it was 1.5 meters wide panorama, and it looked incredible. The detail was amazing. It was completely sharp, and there was no issues with ghosting or any stitching issues that I found, which is great. All right, let's get into it. So we're currently in the library module. You can see that there's all 15 images there. We're going to switch over to the develop module. You can see that I haven't actually, I'll just go back to library, you can see that I haven't actually made any adjustments to these images, so I've gone back to the completely raw files that are straight out of camera, just so that you can see the whole process. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to one of the middle images because I want to get a good amount of foreground and background, and I'm actually going to select all of these images first and stitch them first, and then I'll edit the stitched panorama once that's all done. And the reason is because it means that I can edit in a way where I'm editing a singular image rather than editing across multiple images, which can be sometimes a little bit problematic. So what I've done is I've selected all 15 of those images. I'm going to right click, come up to Photo Merge and Panorama. You can see the shortcut there is Control M for Mary. So immediately you can see that there's a status bar there creating Panorama Preview. You can see on the top right hand corner the select a projection is cylindrical. That's generally the one that I've always used and I've always had really good results. We're just going to look at spherical for the sake of experimentation. Not a great deal of difference. And perspective, which I never get good results from, but we'll have a look at it anyway just for the sake of demonstration. Unable to merge photos, so that's interesting. Alright, so cylindrical is the way that we go. Now what we're going to look at is fill edges. Now I'm thinking based on the content around the edges that we should actually have a fairly successful filling in of those edges. And what that means is it just removes the need to crop those edges out and lose resolution in the file. So I'll fill those edges, but if I need to crop a little bit later or make any adjustments later, then I'm more than happy to do that. The sky should be totally fine. We'll just see how we go with these bottom sections and the corners. There might be a bit of mirroring of parts, but we'll just see how it works. So this basically just works on a very similar way to Content Aware, where it fills the edges out, and yep, that's done a great job. That looks pretty good. So if I turn that on and off, you can see that there is a little bit of doubling up of some sections, but nothing major. For now, I'm going to leave that as it is and just edit the image as it is. You can see also with the sky, based on those tones of the overcast day, that that would be very easy for the algorithms to be able to create those extra sort of parts that are needed. I'm not going to click auto settings because I want to do the editing in Lightroom, and I'm not going to click create stack because I'm pretty happy with how this image stitches together. I've done it plenty of times before and I've never had any issues, so I'm just going to go ahead and click merge. You can see up on the top left hand corner there that there's a bit of a status bar where it's creating that panorama. Now what Lightroom automatically does is creates a new image, which is all of the images stitched together, and it creates that as a DNG, even though the original file was a .cr2, which is the Canon proprietary RAW file. So that means that we still have all of the benefits of a RAW workflow, but it's in a DNG, so which is great when you're working with stitched images. That flexibility and edit in post is always a good thing. So yeah, just waiting for that status to finish. It's obviously 15 full resolution RAW files, about 22 megapixels I think, or 21. So it will take a little bit of processing to create that panorama. But yeah, it should be all fine. So it's obviously going to be a massive file afterwards as well. All right, looks like we're pretty close. And there we go. All right, let's go along. You can see now there is a 16th image that's been imported. And you can see at the bottom there, it is 20,957 pixels wide by 5,900 pixels high, which is ginormous. And there is the image, the stitched digital negative. And if we look at this image at 100%, you can see the incredible level of detail that has resulted in this image. Absolutely amazing. Now, it looks like we actually have a little bit of ghosting. There's a penguin head that is floating above that water. So we'll definitely have to deal with that. But I'll actually do that later on. We're just looking at the overall image at the moment. All right, yep, looking pretty good. That's an amazing amount of detail. Fantastic. All right, so we now have a digital negative to work with, which is great. So from here, I would go through the process of editing that digital negative, and then we'll export it out and we'll have a master TIFF file to work with. Okay, so I'm just going to go out to maximize my screen so that I've got plenty of room to work on this image, or maximize it as much as possible. All right, so I'm just going to start by adding a little bit of contrast. You can see that the capture, the original capture on this image, I'm really happy with it. It was overcast weather, so it was fairly soft light. There wasn't any majorly bright areas or dark areas. Obviously, the sky is fairly bright, which I want to do some recovery on. But we're not talking about massive amounts of contrast where there's no detail in highlights or shadow areas. So it's a fairly straightforward image to work on. So just starting by dropping those highlights, and I'm just going to increase the shadows just a little bit. And I'm also going to drop the exposure again just to bring back the detail in those highlights. Now you can see that there's lovely detail in that cloud now, so that's kind of starting to really get the sky to where I want it to be. And what I'll use is a specific adjustment for that bottom area of the image to bring that back up so that the exposure is not quite as dark as what it is now. I'm just going to add a little bit of clarity and texture, not really necessary for this type of image, but I just like to add it because it does give a really nice effect. And I'm just going to increase our vibrance and saturation. Being an overcast day, it was a little bit flat in terms of color intensity. Not that this area has a lot of color to work with anyway. It's a fairly drab environment, but obviously we just want to take advantage of any boost to color that we can. I'm just going to increase the tint a little bit there just to remove a little bit of that cyan, and I'm just going to warm up the image a tiny bit as well with the temperature. Not a great deal. All right, so let's go down to detail, and what I want to do is just apply a little bit of sharpening. Doesn't need to be a huge amount. Again, the detail in this image is massive, but I'm also going to mask that sharpening as well because obviously I don't want to apply sharpening to all parts of the image. Excellent. All right, let's go down to lens corrections, remove chromatic aberration, absolutely important. And I'm also going to apply some profile correction as well. This was shot on the 17-40mm Canon lens, which does have some vignetting, but that will certainly take care of it. All right, transform, we don't need that one. Effects, we don't need that one. And calibration, we don't need that one. All right, let's go back up to basic. And what I'm going to do now is use the adjustment brush to make some specific adjustments. Well, we'll just zoom back out first. Use the adjustment brush to make some specific adjustments to certain areas of the image. And what I primarily want to do with that is increase the brightness of the ground area and decrease the brightness of those clouds just a little bit. I also want to just bring a little bit more brightness to the central part of the image. This river system that's flowing from these glaciers that you can see in the distance there really is quite amazing, and I want to make sure that that remains as part of the main focal part of the image. Alright, so I'm just going to reduce the size of that brush just a little bit, and with a little bit of exposure added, so 0.25 increase, that's fine. I'm just going to paint that in. It's very, very subtle. I'm not going for really hard and heavy adjustments. I just want it to be subtle, bringing in attention to that central part of the image to keep the focus there. So what I'm going to do now is just decrease the exposure of using highlights and exposure of the actual sky, just so that I can bring a little bit of drama and texture back into the sky and see the beauty of those clouds, because there is some beautiful texture in there. There we go. That's great. Just going to draw up the exposure a little bit of this foreground area. Again, just to maintain that focus on the central part of the image. I'm going to add a new adjustment, and that's just going to be a slight increase in exposure. Not as much as before. I'm just going to drop that a little bit more, and I'm just going to add that in to this central part of the image, because that's where I want to keep people's focus. Now, the edits that I do, if it's a really critical image and it's an image that I'm planning to print, the edits that I'm going to do wouldn't remain purely, I guess, decided upon in a digital sense. What I would do from here is to always print the image and then sit with it. I'll usually sit with the digital edit for a couple of days just to see that I'm happy with everything, but then I'll also usually print the image out, especially if I'm coming up to an exhibition or if it's for a book or anything that I've got some level of control over the printing process, just to make sure that I'm happy with everything. So what I am going to do with this image is when I take it into Photoshop, I will make some adjustments just with the warp tool to be able to correct that horizon. And what I'll do is I'll actually create a separate video for that. The main thing that we're looking at today is the stitching process as well as the editing process within Adobe Lightroom, and then of course the exporting process. So just let's have a little bit of a closer look at this image. And I'm pretty happy with that at the moment. Now, this camera at the time as well, I also had some dust on my sensor. So what I'll do, generally with dust, yep, there's one you can see right there, or a couple. So normally I take care of any dust issues in Photoshop, just because it gives me a slightly better result. So I will be taking care of those in Photoshop, but I just wanted to double check and confirm that there were issues there, and to let you know that that's how I will deal with them. Now, in terms of how this image looks at the moment, I'm pretty happy with that edit. It gives a nice kind of focus to the central part of the image. There's lovely detail in the clouds. It's not too overbearing. There's nice a slight darkening around the edges of the frame, just to keep that attention and focus on the central part of the image, but it's not overworked or overdone. It's a fairly straightforward basic edit and stitch process, because I shot this image correctly in camera, which is always the way that I try to go. So yeah, it certainly helps with your editing and workflow afterwards and makes it far quicker and more efficient. Alright, so the only thing that I'm going to do while I've been talking about this is I'm just going to apply a little bit more brightness to those outer edges. I just want to increase that brightness a little bit. Excellent. Alright, that's good. Yep, happy with that. So from here, being happy, let's assume for a second that I've sat on this image for a couple of days and just made sure that I'm happy with the edit. I would then go ahead and export the image. So I'll just export that, click that there. Yeah, TIFF, Adobe RGB, bit depth is 16 bits per channel. I'm not resizing. I want to have a full resolution, uncompressed TIFF with Adobe RGB, and that way I've got all the information there as a master file. So what I'm going to create now is just an extra folder called master TIFF, and that's where I'll save the image. Select folder and export. Alright, so let's go into Bridge, and you can see there that we have a alright, you can see there we have the panorama. Just going to increase that size. And what I'm going to do is actually go into the master TIFF file, and there we have our edited TIFF. Now it is a massive file, 713 megabytes. So yeah, obviously very, very large in terms of file size, but when you have these big panoramas that are stitched from multiple full resolution images, that's what you end up with. So from here, what I'm going to do is just open this photograph in Photoshop, and we're going to take care of those extra little things that I was talking about. So firstly, we're just going to have a look at those dust marks. Now, I'm not going to clean up all of them because it's quite a large image and it will take some time. Alright, let's just have a look. There's one right there. So if I select the, where is it? Alright, so J is the shortcut for the healing brush tool, which is normally the tool that I use for cleaning up dust marks, because I just find that it works really well. Oops, spot healing brush tool, I'm sorry, not the healing brush tool. And basically it works off a content-aware process. It samples the pixels, not only where the dust mark is, but also around, and you can see it totally cleans up all of those dust marks. So I'll go through this with a fine-tooth comb. I won't do it in this video today because it obviously takes quite a bit of time, but it at least gives you an idea of the process that I go through to be able to find all of those dust marks and go from there. Alright, I will have another video coming looking at the warp stabilizer tool as well as other warp tools to be able to adjust your image if you have a crooked horizon, and we will go from there. So thank you for stopping in and checking out this edit of this panorama that was photographed in South Georgia in the Southern Ocean off South America. Hope you've enjoyed it, and hope there's been some tips and tricks there that have helped you to understand my edit and workflow. Hopefully they'll help you as well. And thanks again for stopping by. Look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.